Around the end of last year, I received something from a Sonoff, and this is this device here. It's a Sonoff Zigbee 3.0 USB Dongle Plus. And I've been testing it since. So let's look at some of my results, recommendations, and use cases. Let me start first by thanking all those wonderful people that have become my YouTube channel members. Thank you all for all of your support. And also thanks to everybody who watched, liked or subscribed to my channel. If you too want to support the channel, you can do so by clicking the join button down below. And now let's look at this Zigbee dongle from Sonoff. Thanks to Sonoff for sending me this USB dongle. Also thanks them for sending me a couple of other devices that I will be recording videos on soon. But let's talk about this Zigbee 3.0 coordinator for the Home Assistant network, because yes, I will be talking on how to use it inside Home Assistant or with Home Assistant. I've been using it now for more than a month. I wouldn't call that extensive use, but still I did use it. And for the first time, I even used it with the ZHA. So, no Zigbee to MQTT, but ZHA, which was a first for me. And the installation was... What installation? I plugged it in my Synology 415 Plus, which I use for testing and recording. I added the stick to the Synology virtual machine, and that's it. The stick itself just popped up in the machine. I selected it, but no, I will later on guide you on how you can do that with Synology, either if you are using Docker version or the virtual machine. And it should work both with the 6.2 version of DSM and the version 7. So first, let's talk about characteristics of this device. Out of box, this device comes with the standard firmware, which is recognized by both ZHA and Zigbee to MQTT, meaning that out of the box, you can plug it into whatever device you are running your Home Assistant on, be it Raspberry Pi 3, 4, Home Assistant Blue, even yellow if you are able to find it somewhere, but I don't think that you can find it unless you are loose, and just add the device. The problem with the firmware that comes out of the factory is the limit of number of devices. If we check this web page from the manufacturer, down at the bottom, you will find this line. The limits of Zigbee Dongle Plus are 21 direct children and up to 40 children. So if you know how Zigbee network works, it means that it can have only 21 direct connections to end devices, and devices can be either other routers or end devices such as door sensor, and it can only handle up to 40 overall devices on the Zigbee network, which is very limiting. For my recording setup, no, because I only have 2-3 devices there, but if I would use this in my Home Assistant setup, it wouldn't work. So the first thing that I recommend you to do is to download the latest firmware. And how do you update the firmware? There are a couple of ways. In this video, I hope to cover both the Linux version and the Windows version. Windows version can be a little bit harder, but not in terms of the hard process. It just requires you to install some software which you normally already have on your Linux machines. That's the biggest difference. Since there is a newer version of the updater, you do not need to open up device like you had to do previously. You can do everything through the script. So let's get started. First, we need to hook up this to a Raspberry Pi. Sonoff documentation offers you two methods. We will be using method 1, but if you don't feel comfortable with that, you can follow the steps in the method 2. So first thing, let's click on this code, right click on download zip, and let's copy this link address. You now have to establish the SSH connection to your Linux machine. As I mentioned, we will be doing Linux first. And here we will first download the zip file, wget, use the link that we copied previously and press enter. Master is here. Unzip master.zip. Okay, now we should have a folder cc2538-bsl-master, and inside that we have this script, and this is the script that we'll be using. So let's go inside this folder. Next thing is we need to download the appropriate firmware for this device, and you can find the link to coordinator down in the description of the video. In this folder here, you will find Z-Stack coordinator firmware, and we have to download one that will work and not corrupt our Sonoff device. If we scroll to the bottom of the page, here you will see the reference that this Sonoff Zigbee 3.0 USB dongle, that is CC2652P device, has to use this zip file here. And that's the first one. But if you would now click here and try to download this from this link, no, you will get a text file or something that looks like text file. Instead, what we will do, we will right-click on download, copy link address, and use this link to download it inside our terminal. To make it easier to work with this file later on, let's type following command: wget to download the file, -big O, letter O. We will give the name of the file cc2652p.zip, and let's paste here the URL we copied previously. Difference between the first, if you would press a copy link, and the second one is that the second one has raw, first one is HTML. Let's press enter. Hopefully everything is downloaded, and let's type unzip cc2652p.zip, as we use this to rename the zip file. We now have hex file here. We have this hex file, which is the firmware. We have the script that we will need to run. And next thing is to test if we can run this script or not. First, let's type Python version. Python version should be higher than 3.4. And our Python version is 2.7.16. So we have to update everything and download the newer version. The command for doing that will be in the description of the video. Next, let's download dependencies. pip3 install PySerial and Intel Hex. PySerial was already downloaded. And before we start uploading the firmware to the device, let's check first if device is visible or not. Type ls to list devices, dev. You can either use tty with asterisk here to show all tty devices, and probably this tty USB 0 is the one we are looking, but it's recommended that you use a different path or different URL. So type in instead ls dev serial by ID and press enter. And it will show you the complete path by serial ID to this device. This port 0 should match the USB 0 here. Now we are ready to flash the firmware. In my text editor I have prepared the full path, and it looks like this. Python 3, because we want to run the Python 3 version of the Python. This is the Python script. We are using port, and I'm using device serial by ID, and here is the full path or the full name from that folder. Then we are using command erase, verify and write. The only thing that you have to be careful here and add is this -- bootloader -sonoff -USB with the name of the firmware. This ensures that we do not need to press and hold the boot button on the board itself, instead we will be doing it via software. Let's press enter and keep our fingers crossed. The board itself is now flashed. If we now insert the stick inside the device that is running Home Assistant and go to the notifications, you should probably see something like this: Sonoff Zigbee 3.0 USB dongle. Let's go to integrations. At the bottom of the list is Zigbee Home Automation. We can see in the list that it has discovered device TTY USB 0, which is Sonoff Zigbee 3.0 USB Dongle Plus with a serial number. Let's click on Submit. And that's it. We now have ZHA with the Sonoff Zigbee 3.0 device installed. So how do you add device with that? Press on Configure, Add Device, take any Zigbee device, for example this motion sensor, and put it in a pairing mode. Here it is, our first device has been added. How do you add it to your Synology machine? First, let's add it to the Synology via the Virtual Machine Manager. To add it to the Synology DSM-7 or DSM 6.2, if you are using Virtual Machine Manager, it's pretty easy. go to Virtual Machine Manager, Virtual Machine, find the virtual machine that is running Home Assistant, Actions, Edit. In Others, under the USB device, select Silicon Labs CP210X UART bridge and press OK. This should map the USB device with the virtual machine. And then in Home Assistant, go to Configuration, Integrations, Plus, select Zigbee Home Automation, find here the device. This is TTY USB 0 Sonoff Zigbee 3.0 USB Dongle Plus with the serial number blah blah blah. Click on Submit. And the coordinator is now integrated inside Home Assistant via ZHA. Once again, if you want to add device, press on Configure, Add Device. For example, we'll take this motion sensor, put it in a pairing mode, and that's it. We now have Sonoff Zigbee dongle with two devices. One is this motion sensor and the other one is the coordinator itself. So what about adding it to Zigbee to MQTT? It's also easy. In order for us to add the stick to Zigbee to MQTT, you first of course have to add it. If you do not have it installed already, press on Add-on Store and install the Zigbee to MQTT. If you are feeling living on the edge, you can install the Edge version, but I wouldn't recommend for the production environment, only for test one. In the Zigbee to MQTT, in the configuration panel, the only thing that you have to add here is the path. If you remembered, our path is a little bit different. This one is for the /stick. Just use the same path that you also used when you flashed the firmware. So it should be device, serial by ID, and this long string. At the bottom of the file, press Save and restart add-on. Our Zigbee to MQTT should now be running with the Sonoff Zigbee stick configured for it. Let's go to Zigbee to MQTT, and once again we can add the device. Once again I will be using this motion sensor from Xiaomi. Click on Permit Join here and put the motion sensor in the pairing mode. And here it is. Our device has been added. In order to get the Sonoff Zigbee 3.0 USB dongle stick working with the Synology 6.2 or 7, you may need to install additional drivers. If you are using DSM version 6.0, it's much easier. You have to click here, select the Synology model you are using. For example, one of my Synologies is DS415 Plus. Download the SPK file and then go to the package center in Synology and just install it. But installing USB drivers for Synology 7.0 version of DSM is a little bit different. Click on DSM 7.0 USB drivers either here or here. Select the type of the CPU that your Synology is using, and if you do not know the type of the processor of your Synology, you can go to Synology website and look there. On this web page, press Ctrl F to search for the model, type in the model that you are using. My DS415 Plus is having Intel Atom C2538 quad-core, 4 threads, processor type is Avoton. And here we have to go to Avoton folder and download those files. In the Synology, I will elevate my privileges by doing sudo -i. And now I will download all 3 files that I need to download. These are the 2 .ko files and 1 .sh for script. Now we have to copy those ko or driver files to appropriate folder. I will use move command cp210x.ko lib modules. Same thing I will do with ch341.co. Script, we will move to different folder. Move, start USB drivers .sh to folder user local etc rc.d start USB drivers .sh. Now this file Start USB drivers.sh will be run each time the system restarts. The script itself has been set up for the CP210X, and this chip is used by the Sonoff device, so you don't have to change it. If, for example, you're using some other device that is using CH341, in this script that is now located in this folder, just edit it and replace the CP210X with the ch341.ko. We now have to run additional commands. Since we are already in the privileged or elevated mode, we do not have to type in sudo, but just to ensure that you don't forget it, I will do it once again here. Sudo ins mode lib modules USB serial.ko. For me, I receive error or warning because this one is already installed, and yes, it's installed because I installed it previously, but you should get a success. And the next module that we need to install is cp210x.ko. Press enter. Once again, I will receive warning or error because it should already be installed. But there is still one additional step that I forgot, and that is to change the user rights. In order for system to run this file, we have to type in the following command, change mode +x, and run it against the script that we previously copied. Press enter. And that's it. Now that you have installed both of those files, the question is how do you add them to the Docker? Well, it all depends. I will not be covering compose file, I will show you how to install it or add it to Home Assistant if you're running it in Docker in a plain command prompt mode. Let's see if we have TTY USB active or not. Yes, we have TTY USB 0, so this is probably our Sonoff stick. Let me create folder for Home Assistant. And let's start typing the command that will download and install Home Assistant. If you already have installed Home Assistant in Synology and you've set it up correctly, you can remove the container and type it once again to pull the path of the COM port. Let me first show you here how you can do that. Docker run -d. Name of the container will be Home Assistant. Restart will equal unless stopped. This means that it will be restarted each time the container fails, if it, for example, fails, but it will not restart if we manually stop it. -e for environment variable, tz for time zone equals, you have to find your own time zone. For me, this is Europe, Zagreb. V for volume mapping. We have to here input the path where our configuration files will be located, and we will be keeping them in the volume 1 Docker Home Assistant folder. Volume 1 Docker Home Assistant. And we will map it to internal folder called config, because this is where Home Assistant is keeping configuration files. For the network, we will be using host network. The other option is to not use the host network but bridge network, and then you can also specify and change the ports. In the host network mode, we have to use the port 8123. And now comes the last part, and the last part is mapping of our Sonoff USB stick or any other Zigbee stick or ZVF stick you have, if it is of course available and seen by the system. Device dev TTY USB 0 will be mapped with the internal device TTY USB 0 path. And of course, the last part is to specify where and what version of Home Assistant we want to get. We will be using ghcr.io Home Assistant stable. And this will now pull and install Home Assistant, and will also map our TTY USB 0 port to the internal TTY USB 0 port. That way we will be able to access this device from Home Assistant. By the way, the same method can be used for Docker installation of Zigbee to MQTT. Just instead of installing Home Assistant, you would install Zigbee to MQTT and add device, the same way you did it here. And in the configuration file, of course, then you would need to specify /dev/TTY USB 0, same that you did here. Let's open Docker. container, and it looks like Home Assistant is running, or at least starting up. Let me quickly configure what I have to configure, and you can see that this device has already been registered. Do we want to set up? Let's click on Submit. And here is our fresh Home Assistant installation, configuration, integrations. We have one device here. And if you want to add additional device, press on Add Device via this device. Aqara motion sensor, put it in a pairing mode. And here it is. The new sensor has been added. And now that we have finished all the possible types of setups, including the virtual machine manager, direct Raspberry Pi, and the Docker installation on some more demanding systems such as Synology version DSM-7, let's look on how to install the latest firmware via the Windows machine. First step in updating the firmware for the Windows machine is to download the Python. If you have already done so, you can skip this step. If not, click on the Download Python and the link will be in the description of the video, and run the file after it has been downloaded. In order to make things easier, we will tick this box Add Python 3.10 to path and click on Install Now. If you are presented with the option to disable the path length limit, click on it and close. Next, we need to install some prerequisites. One of them is PySerial and Intel Hex. The command for that will be in the description of the video. For this we will be using PowerShell. In the search field of the Windows, just start typing Power S for PowerShell and click and open the PowerShell. Here we will type in the command pip install PySerial and Intel Hex. You may already have those installed, so if you do have, that's no problem. If you receive warning that there is a newer version, you can install the newer version. Python pip install upgrade pip, and it should install the latest available version. Of course, we also need to download both firmware and the Python script. Firmware can be found on the same link that is in the description of the video, and we need this first version, Launchpad Coordinator. The latest version at the time of the recording is 2021-12-17. Click on it and press Download. And of course, we need to download the script to program the firmware, and this can be done by clicking on the code and download zip. Direct link to the zip file is also in the description of this video. Unzip both files and put the hex file, which is the firmware, in the same folder where the script is. Let me change to a folder where all the files are. And let's see what we have here. Here we have the firmware and the script we need to run. But before we run it, there is one additional step we have to check first, and that is to verify on what port the device is connected. There are two ways on how you can do that. While you are still running the PowerShell, you can use this command and it will tell you that it's on the COM5, or you can use Device Manager. Look at COM ports and see that we have Silicon Labs CP210X on the COM5 port. The next step is once again to run the command, and this is the same command as we would run it on Linux, but with a different port. Python, name of the Python script, and port. I will delete this part here. This is the Linux port. And instead we will type here COM5. We will be using erase, verify, and write flags. And once again, bootloader -sonoff USB. The last part of the command is the firmware that we have downloaded previously. Let's press enter. And this is it. The new version of the firmware is now flashed on the Windows. If you're having issues with this command, don't forget to run this command as administrator. As you can see here, this is administrator Windows PowerShell. I really do hope that you will find this video useful. I've shown you a couple of ways on how to update the firmware to the latest version if you are using Windows or if you are using a Linux machine. I've also shown you how to connect it to Home Assistant if you run Raspberry Pi, or if you're running it Synology in the Virtual Machine Manager and also Docker. And also I've shown you how you can add it to both ZHA and the Zigbee to MQTT inside Home Assistant running on virtual machine. So what is my opinion about this stick? I've been using Zigbee stick for more than a year now, or maybe even 2 years, and I'm really happy with it. But the big difference between the stick that I'm currently using and this one from Sonoff is that Sonoff one is much more cheaper. In terms of performance, I think that both devices with the latest version of firmware can support 100 direct connections or up to 200 total devices on the Zigbee network, which is more than enough, and probably I will never ever have that many devices unless Sonoff or Aqara send me some free stuff. So would I recommend it? Yeah, sure, device is great. But one thing I would recommend to anyone who is using any Zigbee stick: please get the female to male extension cable. Why? The reason is simple. You want to move away the Zigbee stick as much as you can, either from your Wi-Fi network or your Wi-Fi router, or from the Raspberry Pi or any other device that is running that stick. Yes, this can really impact and influence the coverage of the network. So if you're having network issues, first try to move the stick far away from your device. One great thing about this device is, because of the price, you can also use it as a router on the network. In order to do that, you would just need to replace the coordinator firmware with the router firmware. And by plugging it in some mobile phone USB charger, you will be able to extend the network without need to buy additional always-on powered devices, such as bulbs, power outlets, or things like that. So yeah, if you're interested in this and want to check it out, you can find some of the links to the Sonoff devices down in the description of the video. And this is it for this Home Assistant how-to with Bearded Tinker. If you have any kind of a comment or a question, you can always leave comment down in a comment section below. But I would definitely recommend that you go to Discord server and leave comment there. I will probably see and answer your question there much faster. Plus, there are some other people that are also active in the Discord server and they may help you too. If you still haven't subscribed, please subscribe and hit the bell button so you get notified on the future video updates and streams, of course. And I'll be seeing you next time. Until then, bye bye and have fun.